Max, thanks for having me in your studio, man.
Dude, thanks for being here in my studio and having me on your show.
Yeah, so this will be on video. So if you're listening to this on the podcast, head to YouTube and check it out if you want to watch us and see how handsome Max is.
Oh, man, I'm blushing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you were one of the first episodes when I started the podcast about 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Recorded here in LA again, and that was all about nutrition. You launched a book called Genius Foods at the time. And now we're expanding outside of that. So Genius Life is coming out soon. That's also here in the video if you want to see. Max can hold it up and flex his big arms.
Flex the biceps while self-promoting shamelessly his new book.
Yeah, but I mean, I love the direction you went with this stuff, as well as, you know, we should share a similar philosophy around nutrition, obviously, but the rest of life as well. And it's not just about nutrition. It's just one lever to pull.
Yeah.
So maybe just talk about the philosophy that you took from last book to this book, and then we can start digging in on a lot of sort of easy things that you can take away.
Yeah, I really appreciate that you use the word philosophy, because I feel like that ultimately when you have to make decisions when it comes to what you're buying for yourself, your loved ones at checkout, you really kind of have to like, it's not necessarily a data-driven decision, right? It's like driven by, you know, accessibility. It's driven by your budget. It's driven by what you believe to be the best decision at any given moment. You know, and a good example of that dichotomy is like organic versus conventional. You know, there's really not great evidence that organic produce is any more nutritious than conventional. And if you look at different, you know, metrics, you know, organic is going to be better for the environment. But you know, if you look at certain markers, it might be actually worse for the environment. We don't know. We don't know these sorts of things. What we know is bad is the industrial agricultural complex, right? You can have what's called industrial organic. And, you know, that's not going to be as good as organic grown on a local small farm by the farmer whose name you know. But because you have to make decisions at every meal, and when you're shopping for groceries, you have to be guided by some sort of philosophy, by some sort of like underlying ethos. And for me, when I can support organic, I'm buying organic, you know, just because you want to, I think decision fatigue is a real thing, and average people, like nutrition is already confusing enough. So in my book, The Genius Life, I try to make it as easy as possible for people to actually take what we know about nutrition to be true, knowing that there are seldom black and white answers, and that nutrition science is continually evolving. But you got to make decisions. You got to like know where you're going to put your money. And so that's what I think I try to help people do with the new book. I mean, there's a lot in the new book, but yeah, it's like how to make those decisions and feel good about them, given what we currently know to be true about health and nutrition.
Yeah. I mean, there's just such a lack of a framework.
Yeah.
To think about not only nutrition, but everything else in life.
Yeah.
And this is the thing that, I mean, this is why we changed the name of the podcast from Keto Answers. We're doing a lot with nutrition. It's just keto is just one way in nutrition to think about, you know, how you're going to change levers.
Yeah.
And then nutrition is just one way to think about health and all the inputs that go into it. Has there been anything that changed since last book as far as nutrition that you've learned that you're like, oh, this is actually you throw in carnivore in there as a tool, or?
No, I mean, not carnivore. That's a very good question though. I would say that the nutritional, I would say personally where I've evolved is I've become less dogmatic about macros and carbs and fat in particular. You know, here's the thing. I think that keto is amazing, and Genius Foods, I write all about keto, and I know that you've been a big keto advocate, and the genie is out of the bottle. You know, the toothpaste is out of the tube and it's not going back in. So I think that's great because keto is a very powerful therapeutic tool for some. That being said, is it something that everybody needs to, is it a bandwagon that everybody needs to be jumping on, like the way we've kind of seen it happen across the internet and just in terms of pop culture? I don't know. I mean, I think that if you're eating predominantly a whole foods, minimally processed diet, I think you're probably going to be okay. The problem is, when you look around the world and you see the dietary diversity expressed among the remaining hunter-gatherers or the world's blue zones, even those that seem to be thriving on low-fat diets, they're not eating the ultra-processed low-fat permutations of what we now call food that are available in our local supermarkets. Yeah. They're whole foods that are naturally low in fat. So I think as long, whether or not you want to eat low-carb, eat low-fat, I think what most people are going to get the most bang from their buck doing is just eating, eschewing the ultra processed foods, and embracing a whole foods diet. And that's why if you go to, I try to be as unbiased as possible. And one of the things that I'll admit is that if you go to a bookstore, and you take any of the diet books that's on the shelf and you stick to that diet, you're probably going to see success, definitely in the short term, possibly in the long term, as long as you adhere to that diet. And I think the reason for that is that no diet book is advocating for higher consumption of processed foods. They're all basically saying that, the same thing. Some might be more heavily in favor of plants, some might be more heavily in favor of meat. But at the end of the day, I think it's the ultra processed foods that are a problem in the modern food environment. So I definitely made that point in Genius Foods, but I think I went even deeper down that path with the new book. And I also put more of an emphasis on protein, which I didn't do at all in the first book. I think eating higher levels of protein for most people is going to do a lot of good. And the reason for that is because it's the most satiating macronutrient. It's the best way to snipe your hunger, and I think we live in a time where the bulk of the foods that we eat, these ultra-processed foods, which 60% of our calories are now composed of, they're not only are they not satiating, but they can actually make us more hungry. They can have that biphasic hunger effect, where like sugary ultra-processed foods like actually makes us more hungry later on. So I think by prioritizing protein at every meal, great way to keep your hunger in check, and of course to promote the growth and maintenance of muscle mass, lean mass, which I think is so important.
Yeah, and what I don't think a lot of people realize when they think about ketogenic diet, yes, it's a great tool. I think that a lot of people now can benefit from it because, we start out as normal humans when we're born, and then our environment is so crazy that we just go and get really, really sick, mess up our metabolism. So for those people who have done that, become obese, diabetic, et cetera, it's a really good tool to come back to baseline. But once that's the case, you should be able to use energy from, carbohydrates or fat. But those two things are energy containing molecules. So you get primary energy from carbohydrates or fat. Fat's also a little structural, but people don't think like it's satiating to eat fat, but you can overeat it and that becomes inflammatory just like overeating carbohydrates does in the first place. And so if you go to one end of the spectrum of overeating carbohydrates and that leads you to a metabolic problem, you can also overeat fat as well.
Yeah, I mean, you could overeat anything. It's just it's going to be very unlikely to overeat protein. I think that's very difficult to do. But you can totally overeat fat. You can totally overeat carbs, and there's a term that I guess is used in the medical literature, but I think I first heard it from this Twitterer, Ted Nyman, who I think does good stuff. He puts out good stuff on Twitter. Energy toxicity. This whole notion of energy toxicity, the fact that we're just inundated with, excessive calories today. And I think at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter all that much where those calories are coming from. It's just a function of the food environment. The food environment is saturated with these ultra-processed foods that tend to be high in both carbs and fat. And I think just like cutting down, like cutting the cord to those kinds of foods, I think is most people are going to get the most bang from their buck. I do think it's important to acknowledge that not everybody's going to be perfect. And I'm totally guilty of eating processed foods. I probably shouldn't have even used the word guilty. I'm a human being. I'm living in the modern world, and right. If you put a bag of Paleo Puffs in front of me, I'm probably going to want to eat the whole bag. I think it's important to still know what these foods do to our hunger mechanisms, because at least then it becomes informed consent when we choose to crack open the bag or open the pint of ice cream. So often it's not, and that's one of the major problems that I think people have when it comes to dieting. It's that when they try to adhere to this advice to eat everything in moderation, and then they realize that they can't moderate their consumption of these foods, they then start to feel like failures. And that's not, I think, the idea that we want to perpetuate, that you're a failure if you're not able to moderate your consumption of these foods. Because you're not. Those foods are designed to be overconsumed. I think a better strategy is to let people know that these foods are addictive. And, it's not just that any one macronutrient is addictive, that sugar is addictive by itself or anything like that. But I think it's the confluence that make these foods, they push your brain to a bliss point, and it's just hard to recover from that. It's hard to pump the brakes, when you're there. And so I think it's more important generally to start educating people about how the way that these foods affect their hunger and their behavior. Yeah.
I mean, I think that we don't think about these things from a micro level when we're talking about like carnivore or vegan. There's a lot of hate for these camps, and I see it on Twitter. I'm, just peeking through, and everybody has an opinion now, and we're not focusing on just the fact that humans are real food omnivores. I mean, this is my hot take in 2020, that we're just designed to eat real food, meat and vegetables, plants and animals.
1,000%.
Yeah. And that seems to be controversial nowadays.
I know.
Yeah.
It's so funny that that's controversial because you get, there's vegans, there's carnivores, and I like to consider myself carnivore adjacent because I'm a loud advocate for the consumption of animal products. I know you are too, but I also firmly believe that eating plants is is going to be additive to health as well. There's just like a lot of people will talk about plant toxins, but what about like anti-fragility, like statistician Nassim Taleb talks about the fact that like these little plant toxins, might be dangerous to a fungus or to a rodent or whatever, but to us actually make us more, I think, resilient if we're already in a place of resilience.
Yeah, it's the same as exercise.
Exactly.
Exercise actually, if you look at it at a micro level, breaks down your muscle tissue. If you're looking at it in a microscope and you do a muscle biopsy, you go, let's never do a push-up again. Let's never do a pull-up or run or do anything or swim.
Right.
But the theory is that you get it in, it breaks down your tissue, and then you build up stronger the same way.
Yeah, I think that's. Hormesis.
Yeah.
What doesn't kill us makes us stronger.
And just look at from a population data. I mean, there's not one carnivore population of all living humans, and there's a lot of living humans who are healthy, long age. So this is where I don't understand the.
I agree. I mean, I think that, the anecdotes are awesome. And I think it's great if you're able to do this elimination diet to see what kind of potential allergen, is or irritant is creating, symptoms or at least exacerbating the symptoms that you're having. Yeah. But then I think you owe it to yourself just because of the psychological role that food plays in our society and in terms of, just how impractical it is to be on one of these, like a carnivore diet, to then begin integrating foods back into your life. I mean, I think it's silly. Like it's so restrictive. And like, to me, it just seems like such a fad, what I'm saying? Like, I'm carnivore adjacent. I have a lot of friends who are on the carnivore diet and even are vocal advocates of the carnivore diet. And, the ones that I'm thinking of are brilliant people, and they put up a really good argument about why they avoid plants. But I just think that despite all the hand waving, it's just hard to get around the fact that it's just that whole like throwing a baby out with the bathwater. I think to me is just not very reasonable.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's a tool. If you're feeling like trash and you can't find the root cause of it from nutrition, stripping down a carnivore diet can be really good for your gut, for example, sort of like a gut reset. But my argument is that being as we're structural omnivores, you should be able to add in those foods and fix that problem. And if you go carnivore, things clear up, and then you add it back in those foods and you can't tolerate them, you haven't fixed the underlying problem.
Yeah. You did a carnivore experiment for a while.
Yeah.
How long were you on it for?
Almost 6 weeks.
6 weeks. Wow. Yeah. I've never done it. I've never experimented with it. But I mean, what was that like? Were you like...
Felt fine.
I felt fine.
Yeah, I felt great. I felt like I normally do, eating the way I do. There wasn't like really much of a change.
I mean, did you have I don't know, a lot of people when they switch over, they have like crazy diarrhea. And
no. I mean, I was pretty low energy for about a week and a half, 2 weeks. I just assumed stripping carbohydrates to literally zero did that. But other than that, it was pretty much like how I eat now. And sort of the same thing, animal or carnivore adjacent, where I eat a lot of animal products, and. I'm eating avocados, olives, macadamia nuts, berries, things like that. Not a lot of fibrous plants. I don't do well with a lot of fiber. Still get fiber through different things. And if I tend to eat plants, I'm eating, instead of kale and spinach, usually doing like microgreens and things like that. Yeah. To add in. But yeah, I mean, speaking of toxins though, I mean, you in this book talk a lot, about nutrition, but toxins in our environment. I think this is sort of a loaded term that people, when you say it, think that we're like sort of granola hippies who, just making the stuff up conspiracy theory, but it's actual, it's real. This stuff is real in our environment. So I figured we could talk a little bit about sort of the uncommon things that people don't understand, or I guess the common things that are uncommon as far as awareness goes.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, what I tried to do, there's a whole chapter in the book where I talk about environmental toxins, and I come at this not from a place of trying to fearmonger or to be alarmist, but I think that we all need to be a little bit more critical of the environmental industrial chemicals to which we're routinely exposed. Some of these compounds we've been exposed to for the entirety of our lives. And so, whereas I don't think it's any one that is at the root cause of all of our problems, I think it's the overall burden of toxicity and the fact that so many of us are just not detoxing appropriately today. And I say detoxing in air quotes because I know the term has been co-opted by the wellness industry to sell detox supplements and teas and things like that.
Juices and juice cleanses.
Juices and cleanses. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm just talking about facilitating your own body's hardwired detox mechanisms. So, that is, I call it the 3 Ps of healthy elimination. Peeing regularly, pooping regularly, and perspiring regularly. You need to do those 3 things on a regular basis. And unfortunately, a significant portion of the population don't. I mean, leisure time physical activity is at an all-time low. I believe only 1/3 of adults today, do like exercise on a regular basis, which is a minority of the population, obviously. Many people don't go to the bathroom regularly, which is shocking. I mean, I'm not a clinician, so I didn't know this until coming out with my first book, Genius Foods. But I can't tell you how many hundreds of messages I've gotten from people all around the world who are like, I was going to the bathroom, I was pooping once every 3 days after embracing your diet, Yeah,
it's either clinically, what I saw was it's either 3 times a day or, once every 3 days.
Yeah.
People who are regular, non-existent.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. I mean, I one a day. I think if that's not too much to ask. You should be going, you should be going once a day, and eating a diet. Well, here's the thing. So healthy digestion is not just about food. I mean, I think movement is crucial. So we live in a time. Obviously, people are sedentary. We sit at desks, for an extended period of time. It's not good for our bodies. It's not good for our brains. It's not good for digestion. So, staying active is important to help keep pushing things along. If I eat a big meal and I recline on like a couch, I know that I'm not digesting as well, just because of the way that my body is oriented. So I'm always trying to be as active as I can. And I don't mean exercise level active. I mean just non-exercise physical activity. Just anything other than being sedentary and sitting on your couch.
Yeah, my fiance and I have actually made a habit of, after most meals, if we can, especially if we're at home just eating, we just go out for a walk 15, 20 minutes afterwards. And I mean, the difference is remarkable. You just feel so much better. You never get that sort of full, heavy feeling. I mean, it makes sense. You're actually using your tissues. You're getting demand for blood flow, and all the digestion goes into your bloodstream. I mean, ideally, this is the cycle that happens. And if you're never pumping blood throughout your body, like people don't understand. This is a normal thing humans did. Like you said, we're sedentary now. Moving your body has built-in mechanisms. It's not just moving your joints and your muscles flex. Like they have pumps that pump your blood back to your heart, and then this perfuses back, and it's sort of this big cycle. And if you don't have that, your body is not going to have any feedback mechanism to actually put anything into the bloodstream.
Yeah, it's true. And also just taking a quick walk after a meal is great for postprandial glycemia. It's great for lowering, blood sugar after a big carby meal. Movement is super important, and it's great for digestion. And, if I'm sitting on a plane all day, which I'm going to be doing tomorrow, if I wake up early and I know that I'm going to be sitting on a day all day, I mean, it pretty much guarantees that my digestion is going to be messed up because I've been sitting all day, it's just painfully obvious. The other thing, drinking lots of fluids, staying hydrated. I mean, it's great for making sure that you're peeing regularly because, the kidneys release, toxins that have become immobilized or neutralized, I should say. When we urinate, but also being hydrated is great. It's important for digestion as well. And then the perspiration aspect of things, so important, whether it's saunas, infrared sauna, hot or dry finish sauna, exercising vigorously. When we sweat, we release a significant, amount of these compounds, whether it's certain heavy metals or BPA or phthalates, flame retardants, like you name it. They come out through the sweat. Right.
Yeah. I mean, one of these recent studies, I'll try to put it in the show notes so we can find it, showed that in a hot sauna, it's like 98% just water, 2% of these other substances. In an infrared sauna, it's like 75% water and 25% these other substances.
That's super interesting. I would love to see that. Yeah.
Yeah, I was shocked. I mean, I have an infrared sauna, so it's some like sweet bonus points.
That's cool. Yeah.
The thing is, like, it's not as extreme. So sometimes I'm like, I'm not like sweating vigorously yet, and it's not.
I wonder if it's a function of time spent in the infrared sauna, because you spend a lot more time in an infrared sauna because it's just slower.
Yeah, I can't remember if they were corrected for time or not, or if it was just a session or temperature or overall volume or whatever. But yeah, I mean, this is where it's so tough to really study some of these things, because I mean, we have the theoretical thing where, you know, infrared is penetrating deeper, you know, allowing more blood flow, et cetera. So yeah, I mean, I'll send it to you if I can find it.
Yeah, it's super cool. You can look up, I mean, you can basically take pretty much anything, and you can look up these blood, sweat, urine studies on PubMed. And you can find these studies that have been done. They look at the rate of excretion, the concentration of excretion of, you know, pretty much any chemical you can imagine, you know, through PubMed. So yeah, I think it's important. And, you know, few of us sweat on a regular basis, and we're not, and also, you know, it's also important to be in an optimal nutrient status, because being healthy and robust and having, you know, the cofactors for your body's, you know, detoxification enzymes and things like that, eating a healthy diet is going to help you be more resilient to these, you know, individual environmental toxin exposures as well. So eating a healthy diet, providing your body with ample sulfur-containing amino acids, you know, sulfur is found in cysteine, which is an essential amino acid. Any like animal protein is going to be rich in these compounds. Cruciferous vegetables also rich in sulfur-containing compounds. Crucially important. Glycine is really important. That's one of the reasons why I'm actually a big fan of collagen, and even supplementary glycine. Glycine is also rate limiting in the synthesis of glutathione, which is the body's master detoxifier. So I supplement with collagen. I even take like pure free-form glycine. Right.
I mean, you think about it too, like the body only has a fixed amount of reserves essentially to deal with any certain given problem. So if you have all this stuff incoming from your environment, that's just, you know, like you said, there's thousands of different ways we can interact with chemicals on a daily basis. It's not, you know, we can try to eliminate the ones we can control, which maybe we'll talk about in a second. But other than that, you know, we're going to get some toxic exposure. And so if inside we're all inflamed in our bodies, taking all of our basic internal reserves and putting that towards just fixing our own cells because our nutrition is making us inflamed, we're not moving, et cetera, it's not going to have the same amount of resources it can divert to just getting these toxins out of your body.
Yeah, definitely not. Definitely not. I mean, it's the overall like burden of like just everything. It's like chronic sedentary lifestyles, chronic climate control. We're not sweating regularly. We're not going to the bathroom regularly. 90% of Americans are deficient in at least one essential nutrient. It's just, it's this like perfect storm. And so that's why I think we're seeing the problems that we're seeing. And, you know, one of the topics that I cover in the book is like endocrine disruption and endocrine disruptors. And every topic that I cover in the book could easily warrant its own book, you know, but I tried to give a 30,000-foot lay of the land with science that was the most relevant, the most actionable, the most achievable for people. And what I think is so crucial to know about endocrine disruptors, with any chemical, there's this dose makes the poison paradigm, right? Like any chemical can become toxic at a high enough dose. Water becomes toxic at high enough dose. But with these endocrine disrupting chemicals, what makes them so treacherous is that they don't necessarily follow that paradigm. And what that means is that they might have what's called a non-monotonic dose response, where at a high dose, you'll see overt toxicity. But then at a low dose, you might see a completely different effect. And so this low dose toxicity is something that for many decades, toxicologists didn't even think was possible. And the fact that many of these compounds from BPA, aka bisphenol A, or its sister compound BPS, or phthalates, or Teflon related chemicals, they might actually have this sort of U-shaped curve where a very high exposure in an animal causes overt toxicity, maybe even death, but then at a much lower dose can actually affect the way that our hormones work. There have been studies that have shown that BPA at doses that we're regularly exposed to can actually alter insulin responses in the body. We know that BPA is a potent xenoestrogen. It acts like estrogen in the body. And so I think that we just all need to be a little bit more mindful, know where these chemicals hide out so that we can minimize our exposure to them. And because certain of them don't actually linger in the body very long, like parabens, phthalates, BPA, they're like 2 or 3 days of reduced exposure, and you're basically excreting them if you're doing all those healthy, like, those detoxification things that I talked about earlier. Other compounds like PFAS chemicals, I always butcher the pronunciation, but it's per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. They're used to create like PFOA. The PFOA is among the PFAS chemicals, and PFOA is used to create Teflon. Those chemicals actually linger in the body for years, if not decades. They're called forever chemicals for that reason. So it's just that we're inundated with them, and I think we're also profoundly empowered to kind of become more aware of them so that we can minimize our exposure. But then, of course, others are just kind of like, they're there and there's not much that we can do. So stressing out is not the solution. I think it's really just more about awareness and reducing our exposure.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what are some of the biggest areas where people maybe are coming into contact with these chemicals?
Yeah.
Don't know it.
Definitely plastics. So, and again, I'm not, perfection is not the goal here because it doesn't exist. If I'm traveling and I'm thirsty, I'm going to, and I have no other option, I'll get a plastic water, I'll get water that's sold in plastic. I'll try for glass. But plastic is inevitable. It's not going anywhere. But if you're storing your food in plastic or beverages in plastic, if you're putting your leftovers in plastic Tupperwares,
reheating it
in plastic, if you're buying foods that are sold in paper wrappers that have a sort of waxy oil-proof layer to one side of them, that oil-proof layer is made with these PFAS chemicals.
Yeah. And also, I think what people don't realize is that stuff comes on cans as well. And so you say plastic, they go, okay, what about a can? It's just, maybe aluminum, that's fine. But those things are actually sprayed with anti-corrosive material so that they can have really thin shippable cans that don't weigh a lot because you don't want to be heavy for shipping.
Yeah.
So you make it really thin, but if you do that, then they corrode really easily and can bust open. So they actually spray the inside of cans with similar molecules.
Yeah, it's scary. Certain foods are more likely to leach these chemicals than others, like acidic foods, fatty foods. If you're storing your, like tomato sauce, meat sauce, in these plastic compounds, that's going to act as a catalyst for the leaching of these compounds. But also, so it's not just plastic, but I mean, first you want to make sure that you're minimizing your use of plastic, especially around food. If it's furniture, not a big deal. Even though furniture can, create dust, and we do end up inhaling phthalates and things like that. But generally speaking, I think if you can just kind of cut down on eating out, because food in restaurants is always going to be stored in plastic, and then cut down on plastic in the house. Get rid of all your plastic Tupperware, replace it with glass. Also, water bottles. I now buy, my beverages in glass. There are few exceptions. As I mentioned, if I'm desperate, I'll buy in plastic. But you have no idea where that water bottle was stored before it ended up in the refrigerator of your, of the Whole Foods. Like it could have been in the truck's hot cargo bed for months. You have no idea.
Or in a warehouse for years.
Yeah. Keep plastics out of your, plastic bottles and stuff out of your car, like, plastic food containers out of your car. People leave plastic water bottles in their car. I'll get into like an Uber and they offer me, a plastic water bottle, and I always refuse it because I'm like, I'm sure that plastic water bottle was just sitting in this guy's car for months, even though it's a very kind gesture.
Then let heat and cool over and over and over again.
Exactly. So I would definitely cut down on that stuff. BPA can hang out on store register receipts. It's a major route of entry through our skin when we touch these heat-sensitive papers that are used to create store receipts. And interestingly, I mean, we live now, the coronavirus has become a big thing. People are actually, the stocks of companies that create these hand sanitizers are blowing up. But if you use a hand sanitizer before touching these store receipts, it actually like dramatically increases the absorption of BPA from this.
Because you're taking away your microbiome in your skin temporarily? Is it opening up?
It basically like opens up the pores. Yeah, I don't have any. That's about as technical as my understanding gets of that. But I've seen the study, and it increases absorption by at least an order of magnitude.
Wow.
And yeah, these are like real world experiments. This wasn't like in vitro on an animal or something like that. These were like people that they got to like do because you're not violating, any sort of code of ethics, because this is what people actually do. They use these hand sanitizers and they touch store receipts. So there's that. I definitely now, I'm a big believer in, I think oral health is super important, but I used to use these Glide dental flosses. We know that those are made with
the single-use ones or what?
No, it's just like the Glide, the kinds that are not the string, but it's like Glide dental floss.
Yeah.
It's like marketed to more easily slide between your teeth. Those are made with PFAS chemicals, like Teflon-related chemicals. And they're people that use those have higher levels of these compounds in their blood. So I use now like dental floss. Mm-hmm. There's a difference between floss and tape. So you don't want to use the tape. You want to use like dental floss.
Not the waxy stuff that's like super, super thin.
The wax is fine. It could be thin. You just don't want it to be that like super slippery tape.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things too that people maybe think about, okay, there's this thing to worry about, that thing to worry about. But if it says BPA free, then I'm good. And I would like to push back on that usually is because, I mean, this stuff just goes in cycles. And so, in the 30s, we thought Crisco was good.
Right.
Turns out it wasn't the case. In the 60s, we thought smoking was good. It's not the case.
Crazy, right?
Now, we're like, okay, BPA is not good. How many other things right now are we, interfacing with that are, we're in 20 years big shit?
That's
that
the
one
thing.
up. And so, I mean, the way I think about it as far as a framework that we were talking about earlier is, how long has that thing been around? I mean, talking about Nassim Taleb, the Lindy effect. If something's been around for longer, likelihood is that it's not problematic. So glass has been around for a really long time. It just comes from basically making really hot sand, right?
Yeah.
Same thing with metals. But when we start talking about plastics and all this industrial stuff that's made at scale, well, now I think we're getting into some problems. Yeah. I mean, it's tough to think about it from a way of, trying to manage every single little, BPA, BPS, PFA, like all these things become really stressful for people. I think stress is another huge point of your book also. It's just like, you don't want to take your toxins down, but increase your stress dramatically.
Right.
You're not going to solve any problems with that.
Right. Yeah. Definitely you want to manage stress. There's this concept that I talk about in the book. I'm sure you're familiar with it. The concept of allostatic load. It's an idea that I advance in the Genius Life, and I think it's a super cool concept. This notion that we each have a finite amount of resources to devote to retaining or to regaining this sense of homeostasis. Homeostasis obviously is balance, and whenever we're confronted with a stressor or an environmental toxin or nutrient deficiency, our body has to work extra hard to bring us back to that state of balance. And the sum total of steps that the body needs to take is known as the body's allostatic load. Mm-hmm. And I think today we're functioning, chronically in this time where people have these glasses that are already half full, because they're just functioning in a state of chronic stress all the time, whether it's work stress, personal life stress. And then you throw in things like excessive amounts of caffeine or intermittent, extended fasting for females, which can be, a major stressor. Over exercise or overtraining, in the gym.
Over sauna,
yeah. So suddenly that allostatic load becomes allostatic overload, and that basically is what burnout is. And so I don't think that's not a good thing. You want to be kind of cognizant of all the places in your life where you're having stress, whether it's acute stress, the kinds of stress that we know are good for us, like sauna, exercise, yada, yada. But then also psychological stress. And you want to kind of orient your life in a way so that you're functioning in a state of that glass being, the baseline of that glass is going to be empty, so that you can throw in things like coffee, which many people love, myself included, or exercise, or what have you, and then actually reap the benefits from those areas. Now, if you can't uproot all of the sources of stress in your life, which I get it. I mean, it's 21st century, there's always a new thing to worry about, right? Like right now it's coronavirus, on top of all the stress that everybody else, that people already experience, there's like the imminent threat of this viral pandemic, right?
Have you flown recently?
I've not, but I'm flying tomorrow.
So I came in yesterday, and I could just feel it with everybody's sort of like on edge, like assessing everybody, like everyone's an enemy or a predator around them.
Wow.
With the virus. I could just, you just sense everybody's, nervousness. A lot of people wearing masks.
Oh, yeah.
Airport's already stressful, and it was just on another level.
That sucks, man. Yeah, I was at a birthday the other night, and my friends were getting picked up by an Uber, and the Uber pulled up, and the driver was wearing a mask. It was just so odd.
Does that mean he has it, or
I don't know?
Just trying to spread it around you,
dude. It's crazy times we're living in, crazy times. But that's the thing. So people, we all, stress is inevitable. It's how you respond to the stress, and I think that's where building your own resilience up really has a profound value, because you might say, well, I can't do anything about this particular source of stress in my life. Maybe it's like this relationship that I'm in, I can't get out of it right now, or I'm stuck in this bad job that I hate, but I need it because I need to pay the bills, yada, yada. Or maybe it's the coronavirus or whatever. Some forms of stress we can't just write off, as much as the self-help world, as easy as the self-help world makes it seem to be able to do. So for those sources of stress, I think that's where building our own resilience against stress comes in really handy, because you can either remove the stressor, or you can become more resilient to it so that it becomes less of a big deal. And so this other idea that I think is super, super important and empowering. It's actually used in the scientific literature, but I stumbled upon it while I was writing The Genius Life, and I was like, wow, this is a really cool way to kind of understand how to boost stress resilience. This notion of cross adaptation. Which I think is really cool and really empowering, that by exposing your body to a certain type of stress, whether it's cold stress or hot stress or even vigorous exercise, that the adaptation that ensues from those activities, from those modalities, then have what's called a spillover effect, where they actually make you more resilient in other areas of your life, namely in terms of your ability to withstand psychological stress.
Yeah.
Which is super cool. You're seeing all these studies now using saunas or cold water immersion and
hard workouts as well. I mean anything that basically you think you can't do it, but then you do it anyways, and you survive afterwards. I think that we're just programmed to be in such a world of comfort. Like you said, climate control, everything.
Yeah.
I think when you just prove to yourself, oh, it's not a big deal, I'm not going to die, you turn off this mechanism of threat, and then you start living a less stressful life.
Yeah. Yeah, it's super cool. And it's amazingly empowering, because I might not be able to control the fact that I work under a boss who I hate, or I still have student debt that is, just like chronically, a burden on my shoulders, or whatever it may be. But I can get to the gym. I can get my butt to the gym, and I can have a great workout. And I know that workout is going to have that spillover effect, that's going to help me be more resilient to stress and mood disturbances, in a meaningful way. So,
yeah. And I think that pulling the levers in the right way too. So if your bucket is full, I had some family stuff going on last year, work was crazy, and I could not turn those ones down. I couldn't turn the volume down. And so instead of trying to add more and more and more, I switched my training from doing more strength and explosive stuff to more gymnastics work. I did, instead of a lot of fasting, which is also a stress, started having breakfast every single day, like routine wise stuff. My off time, instead of going out with tons of people socially, it was walking outside, just being in nature. And these things I think helped recharge and sort of almost expand that bucket a little bit more, so I could put more in. And then caffeine is another one, taking caffeine out. And it's not that we should stop doing those things that are stressful, but just find another outlet while some other things adapt or cool down. For me, it was just like I was like, okay, I got like 6 to 8 months of this stuff. Like I know it's not going to really go down until that point. And so pulling it back a little bit and dialing it back in some of these other levels where you think, okay, this is good. Maybe we'll take it to the edge. A lot of times you're talking about women, especially with their fluctuation in hormones, can get sort of caught in this trap of over-exercising, under-eating, fasting too much, over-caffeinated, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And, this is about figuring this out, whatever works for you as well. And knowing, oh, this is what burnout feels like to me. Here are some of those symptoms of, not being super inspired, not being motivated, having low energy, et cetera. I mean, if you clear out labs, like you're trying to pile on too much in your life. And I think that, being able to pull that back and figure out your own path of, oh, okay, if I do this, it's the same thing with nutrition. Maybe some people do really well with more of a plant-based diet. I have no problems with that. I think that fundamentally, having, real foods, eating those. Now you have a spectrum where people are going to do better eating more animal products or more plant products. Same thing with sort of stress input, stress output, is that some people can tolerate more and have different things that help reduce their stress and just sort of need to find out and play around and figure out what works for them. And so noticing, okay, this is a time for high stress. Now I'm going to use tool A, B, or C to reduce that or tweak it and alter my sort of behaviors and day-to-day habits so that way I can actually get back to a baseline level.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's going back to the concept of allostatic overload. You want to make sure that you're not overfilling that glass at the end of the day. So I think it's useful for listeners to think about, when they wake up in the morning, like what that glass is looking like. Is it already half full by the time you wake up? If it's already half full, then you might want to, maybe tweak your workouts a little bit, or maybe build in some like forced like recovery, like maybe don't go to the gym that day, or maybe consume less caffeine. I love caffeine, and observationally, you look at the data, caffeine seems to be protective across a whole range of neurodegenerative conditions, which is my passion, averting age-related brain disorders. And so you might think, well, I mean, geez, caffeine is like this like miracle food, but actually it activates your body's stress pathways. And if you're drinking too much of it, especially in a state of like already being stressed out, then it's not going to make you feel good. It's going to make you feel crappy.
Yeah. I mean, this is exactly what happened to me. So I stopped drinking caffeine like 8 months ago. 2 or 3 months ago was when I put it back in. And I felt every time I drank it, and this is not a lot, we're talking about like 1 cup of coffee roughly, I just felt terrible energy crash 2 or 3 hours later. And I go, okay, not yet.
Yeah.
There's been times in the past where I'd be drinking tons and not having any effects.
Well, you don't have those energy crashes when you are not drinking caffeine. Like I find that the way that I think about it is caffeine doesn't create energy from thin air. It borrows it from later.
Right.
And so, I too will find that when I cut caffeine out, and I did recently 2 months with no caffeine, and I felt great. I got to be honest. I mean, I did miss the ritual of making the morning coffee, and then, I like the flavor of it, but yeah,
decaf, man.
Decaf, I know. Yeah,
decaf cold brew on keg at our office.
Oh, nice.
Yeah,
wow,
dangerous.
That's the thing. I mean, yeah, I think that caffeine is like here's the thing: if you're addicted to it. If you're not addicted to it, it's a mental boost, it's a performance boost. But if you're addicted to it, then what happens is it just kind of brings you back up to what was previously your baseline.
Right. And I saw this with my patients a lot of time too, where they would have the same response that I'm having recently. They go on vacation and have coffee or whatever and drink espresso and be totally fine. And so then they're taking away and reducing all this allostatic load, adding back in the caffeine and feel totally normal. No problem, no energy crashes. And so again, I think you just have to not think about this as a broad thing, but think about how does this apply to me as the individual and how can I sort of learn my own health path and health journey. But yeah, I mean, stress is really complicated. And I don't think we talk about it enough as a society, especially in the health circle, of figuring out your own individual path in it. And I think that can happen culturally as well. I mean, I was in Spain a couple of years ago and just observing the culture and like people eating this shitty fried food, tapas everywhere, staying up, partying, drinking literally every single night of the week till like 2, 3, 4 a.m. I was thinking like, man, this is violating every single thing that I understand about like how people live long and healthy lives. And I look it up. I'm like, okay, what is the life expectancy here in Spain? It has to be terribly low. And it's like top 5.
Wow. Yeah.
Like, okay, but these people are also getting crazy amount of meaning, belonging. They're very social. It's a very different context than how, as Americans or in the Western world, we live life and sort of have a very different mindset in how we belong. And I think that social media is not helping. I think it creates a lot of dynamics with people and doesn't allow them to have real relationships a lot of times. They think they're getting it and they're subbing it out, but it's just as fake as the Doritos instead of eating vegetables.
Yeah.
And we're getting a mismatch in our brain, but we think we're getting food, but we're not actually getting food. We're thinking we're getting social belonging and stimulation. We're not actually getting it.
I know. It's like junk food across like the whole spectrum of the human experience. It's like junk food, social interactions, junk food, junk food, entertainment, it's just like junk food news, like the news is so good. And I've worked in media for, over a decade. Like if it bleeds, it leads. That's like great for ad dollars, but it's like terrible for the human psyche, right?
Well, I mean, we're programmed for it. We're programmed to identify threats over things that are non-threatening.
Yeah.
And that's just a normal human thing. And I think that people, like you said earlier, sort of have this tendency to have guilt or, feeling bad that they react to this modern environment. All the modern environments do is catering to what we're wired for.
Yeah.
Like we successfully made an environment to trigger us and all the things that we are normally triggered on.
Yeah.
That's just the way it is.
Yeah. I love Jiddu Krishnamurti, who famously said, "You are the world." You know, the world is a direct reflection of who we are on the inside. You know, if you're an a-hole on the inside, well, you know, the world is going to become like reflective of that inner a-hole, you know, in so many ways. And that's what you know, you inherit the world that you deserve. And obviously there are exceptions to that rule, but I mean, generally we are each so divided in so many ways, internally, spiritually. You know, we pass judgment on things. And so the world is just that, basically. I mean, you know, we don't want to be judged, but we love to pass judgment on people.
Yeah.
I see this all the time. I mean, I get, you know, I mean, on social media, I mean, I'm fairly lucky. Like, I think others get, you know, like, I'm not the most controversial person.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm like balanced, you know, in my message. But even so, if I did a post the other day and I said organic is often better. I use the term often, right? So I didn't say always better, but nonetheless, I got some people coming out of the woodwork. You know, these like quote unquote science-based advocates that, and I say science-based because like they might be science-based, but they're also science-bound. And I think that science can provide many answers, but it doesn't provide all the answers. And nonetheless, this person came out, we were like dueling about it. And
so what was the duel about?
Well, it was about like organic versus conventional. And here's the thing, I'm always listening. I'm always willing to challenge my beliefs and assumptions. And if I get convincing new information, I'll integrate it and I'll incorporate it into my message. I'm open-minded, basically. But the argument was that organic is, there's no research to say that organic is more nutritious than conventional, which is actually true. Depending on where you look, I mean, you'll find some vitamins in higher concentration in organic. You'll find some minerals, you know, in higher concentration in conventional. Across the board, it's very hard to say that one is more nutritious than the other. But you are getting, obviously, you know, the likelihood is much higher that you're getting exposed to synthetic pesticides in conventional. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, you know, there's industrial organic, and then there's like small farmer regenerative organic, right?
Very different.
Yeah. The industrial organic system, I mean, you can still have cross-contamination just by nature of the food system today. And, you know, there's still organic approved pesticides that are being used in organic produce. And so, but that being said, like, I'm just not willing to, you know, I don't want to risk my health to these big synthetic industrial agrochemicals. And that's just like a personal philosophy, like choice that I want to make. The other issue is that, you know, organic produce tends to have higher levels of polyphenols and flavonoids and flavanols and certain plant compounds like quercetin, you know, compounds that we know are beneficial to human health, but we don't have the data and they're not essential. So you can't say that one is necessarily healthier than the other. But, you know, it doesn't take a stretch of the imagination to see how these compounds could be more beneficial. So that was the argument, basically. It was just, it's a lot more nuanced than I think, and complicated than I think most people like to portray.
And the nutrition too. I mean, organic isn't this special stamp where it fixes everything. It's just a certification. So if you look at the soil, that's where you're getting all the nutrition from.
Yeah.
And so
the other thing, and even before this argument, and I don't actually argue. You know, people will argue with me, but I'm like...
You're actually pretty impressive on Twitter. Like, you don't take the troll bait at all.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I don't. I don't like to argue. Because the thing is, I'm just not that... I don't have that personality type. I'm not combative. I'm always, you know, I'm capable of listening and pivoting and whatever. But I, you know, I think... people have like biases, you know, and I don't know where this person was coming from in their life, and you know, like maybe they're funded by the junk food industry, like who knows, you know. And I like using the term junk food because I think there's this growing populace of junk food apologists online that are like, you know, you can eat Pop-Tarts and Doritos. They're, you know, no food is inherently healthy or unhealthy. It's all about the context in which it's consumed. And, you know, that may be true, but that doesn't mean that Play-Doh is a food, you know, just because it has calories and it's non-toxic, famously. I think that we need to have empirical definitions for like what food is and what food isn't. I digress. Yeah, I just think it's we live in like an interesting time, you know, and everybody has an opinion and it's all good, you know. At the end of the day, though, I think bickering and disagreements, it's all fine. We're human. Like, that's part of the human experience. You got to be kind to one another, and you got to be, I think, when we resort to like ad hominem attacks and name calling, I think that's where we've fallen off the wagon.
Yeah. Most of Twitter. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the key is just being open to receiving new ideas.
Yeah.
And you can go at it as long as you have the precondition of, I may change my mind in this discussion.
Yeah.
Has there been anything in the last couple of years where you're sort of flipped your stance or reverted on due to receiving new information?
That's a good question. Well, I mean, and there's a major one. I now will eat white rice occasionally, whereas I used to.
You're canceled, man.
Here's the thing, canceled. I went through a period where I used to. So before I knew really anything about health and nutrition, I used to eat a ton of whole grains. I used to eat this is like 2000. This is like most of my life.
It's the path to figuring out health. I mean, it goes from like eating processed food to generally, especially if like you're, roughly our age, to low fat, lean protein, high grain, and then it started, flipping all around. So it was just the path for, I think, a lot of
us. Yeah. So I think I started there, but it was funny because I would eat, if you put like a piece of if you put white rice in front of me or a piece of white bread, I wouldn't touch it. But if you put like brown rice or quinoa or whole wheat bread, I would eat so much of it because I was just like, this is a health food. Like, this is like, the more I eat, the healthier I'm going to be. And I've always valued health and I've always been interested in health. But then I realized that really I'm eating like probably way too many carbohydrates for my activity levels. I'm not an athlete. I mean, I love to work out, but I'm just probably eating I was probably eating about 300 to 400 grams of carbohydrates every single day. And I was never overweight or anything like that, but I was just like eating a lot of like kind of junk, Mm-hmm. So then I cut all the grains out pretty much, and I built my diet around animal products, vegetables, things like that. And I felt amazing. I actually have never felt better. But now I will occasionally use I'll eat sushi and I'll eat white rice. Whereas before I would not even go near the white rice because I was like, white rice is toxic. But because we know that unless you know where the brown rice is coming from, that brown rice is a significant source of arsenic, mm-hmm. I'm like okay with white rice. So that's like something that I never would have thought that I would like actually order white rice in a restaurant.
Have you messed around much with a CGM?
I've never had a CGM. No, I want to get one.
I'll get you one. It's amazing just because you can start to realize and think of, okay, minimizing blood sugar is always a good thing. Yeah. Area under the curve is what you want to optimize for. Mm-hmm. And so I've noticed that different foods, like when I go eat sushi, and I don't know exactly why this is. I don't know if it's the way they cook it for a longer period of time, if they put vinegar in it, if I'm having fish with it and there's some fat in it. But my area under the curve when I have sushi versus any other thing with rice is like flat. My blood glucose with that is flatlined.
Well, sushi rice has been cooled, so you're getting a lot of that retrograded resistant starch, and also vinegar in and of itself can reduce postprandial hyperglycemia. But sushi rice has because it's cooled, a lot less of it is a significant. I forget the exact.
I suppose like where you're getting the sushi from and how they serve it for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, this is sort of interesting to play around with stuff like that.
So cool.
Because, I mean, there's just some things for me. Like I do best with plantains, pretty green plantains, sweet potatoes, and white rice with sushi. And like other than that, I think because of my past, I was eating just terrible junk when I was younger and got really overweight, just busted my metabolism. And most other carbs are sort of like off limits for me. They'll jack me up. Even tested Oatly. As just drank I think it was 12 ounces of Oatly, which is like what's in a medium oat milk latte. Mm-hmm. They process the oats into maltose, which is actually on the glycemic index 105 over glucose. It's actually the highest glycemic index of any carbohydrate you can get.
Jesus.
And then so they basically turn the oats into like a corn syrup, like an oat syrup sort of thing, made completely of maltose, and then put that in there with canola oil. And so this is what oat milk was.
Wow.
So I tried that, and I think it was like mid 70s, and it jacked me up to 160.
Damn.
Just from one cup.
What was the glycemic load of that? Like how many grams of like carbs are in a cup?
12.
That's it. Wow.
Yeah.
Insane.
Yeah. But I mean, this is like when you're making fake food, stuff like this happens.
Yeah.
And I mean, this is sort of like the greenwashing of the health industry in general. And something that I think really pisses me off is, trying to market these alternatives like, oh, this is better than milk if you have dairy intolerance or, for whatever reason. We're going to make this fake food full of maltose and vegetable oil and all these other preservatives and synthetics. And then that's going to be healthier for you.
Yeah. Gross. I would not go near that stuff. That's the thing about processed foods is that it really, the processing of food really does make it more fattening. You know what I'm saying? Like, calories in, calories out. I'm not refuting calories in, calories out, but when you eat a whole food, like if you eat a handful of whole nuts, you're actually pooping out a significant proportion of the calories that you consume via whole nuts. Whereas if you take those nuts and you turn them mechanically into nut butter, you're absorbing 100% of the calories from those nuts.
Not only that, that's also way more delicious.
They're way more delicious. Yeah, it becomes hyper palatable.
Right. Yeah. I was in Thailand last year, a year and a half ago, and it was the first time I had seen macadamia nuts with a shell on. Have you ever seen macadamia nuts like as they come?
No.
So they used a saw to go through and create a little line, and then they give you a tool. They give you this bag, and they give you a tool to pop that shell open, and most of the time that explodes the whole thing everywhere.
Wow.
And so to think about okay, yes, we're talking about nuts as we get them in the grocery store right now. Great. But think about the energy expenditure it would take you to pick these nuts from the tree, then smash them out of this crazy shell that takes a saw and a giant metal tool to pop open.
Damn.
And think about how many handfuls of nuts you could consume.
Yeah, that would burn. I feel like if you didn't have the saw, it would probably burn hundreds of calories just to get to one nut. It's insane. Yeah, that's why nuts. You got to be careful with nuts.
Yeah.
Some nuts are, you got carbs and fat. The only other place where you'll see both combined in nature is like dairy.
Dairy, yeah.
And nuts are very easy to overdo. You can put granted they have additional seasoning, but those Blue Diamond, sea salt and vinegar almonds, in front of me, I will eat the entire tin, and that's 1,000 calories right there.
I'm more of a sucker for salted mac nuts.
Salted macadamias?
Yeah. And then you throw in a little bit of 100% dark chocolate, and I'll go through an entire bag.
God. So that's why you've made those at your company. Yeah,
exactly.
They're tasty.
Yeah. So, as far as, we covered toxins, we covered sort of stress and things like that. Nutrition, obviously. The other pillars that you have are, sleep, circadian rhythm. This is another thing where it's not complex to be healthy in the modern world, but it's really hard.
Yeah.
Getting off of a flight or being on a plane, and if you don't have special glasses on, you're getting bombarded with this light, whether you like it or not.
Yeah. And
this is one of those things where just optimizing for, what a normal environment would be is actually extremely difficult.
Yeah, it's true. Our world has mutated in so many ways, and the human animal, it's just we haven't given ourselves a chance to catch up. Whether it's light overexposure in the latter half of the day to not enough light in the earlier half of the day, living in a chronic state of jet lag as a result. It's super interesting if you consider the fact that if you go to bed every night at let's say 10 p.m. to wake up for your job, and then Friday and Saturday night you're staying up 3 to 4 to 5 additional hours later, then that's the equivalent of having crossed many time zones, and then you're starting every Monday of every week jet lagged.
Yeah, and maybe Matt Walker calls it social jet lag.
Is that what he calls that?
Social jet lag. Just waking up consistently.
So you wonder why people feel crappy on Mondays, and 100%. That's not a good precedent to start your week. You're basically starting every week jet lagged.
Yeah, so I have blackout curtains in my bedroom, and then we have hue lights that are programmed to come up when the sun comes up.
Wow.
And so this is something where I wake up to light that looks like the sun, and then I open the curtains as soon as I can. But I got here yesterday, and then doing that every single day, no matter if it's weekend or weekday, and being super strict is the best possible thing I could do for energy and focus throughout the day. It's the biggest sort of life hack, I would say.
Optimizing your sleep.
Optimizing sleep
and then with those lights.
For it to be the same exact time every single day. And I can go to bed, between 9 and 11. That really doesn't matter. But waking up the same time every single day. I woke up today at almost 4:30 exactly, which is 6:30 Central Time. completely blacked out room. And so my body is just ready to rock at that time.
Wow.
And I think that obviously I'll adjust to, over the time I'm here, but
You know, it would be awesome. It would be awesome if we can have blackout curtains that
automatically open.
automatically open, so that you can obviously go to bed in the darkness, but then wake up to the sunrise.
Yeah.
You
So
know, that would be
we
awesome.
actually have lines that do that.
Seriously, wow.
But what I don't like with that is that you wake up to it opening because it's sound there's a sound to it.
That's fine.
And either it's already super bright and then it's because the lights we program, they get bright over the course of like 30, 45 minutes, sort of like a sunrise would. And so it's natural at different stages of that you wake up. And so it sort of allows you when you're in a sleep cycle to, as you're coming out of one, wake up to that light becoming brighter. Whereas if it's fixed time where it's just this noise that you wake up to, and there's something a little bit different to that. So I've tried with both. I prefer the lights coming on.
Super cool.
But I've actually thought, that was like when we moved into our house a year and a half ago, I'm like, blinds. This is always like, I don't think that it's normal for people to wake up with blackout curtains and then have to like wake up in complete darkness.
I agree.
And then go open the blinds after that.
I agree. Yeah.
But living in a city, you can't not have them.
Right.
I mean, I wear eye mask even still because like I want sort of perfection and a little anal about that. But
Same. Yeah. I mean,
what do you do here?
Well, I'm now moving into a new place. So I'm in the process of moving to Santa Monica, and I've got a room that my bedroom has blackout curtains, but I haven't really had that problem yet. In my current bedroom, when I wake up, the curtains are not blackout, and so by the time I wake up, I've got some ambient light in the room. So I don't know how I'm going to deal with this whole new blackout thing. Waking up
I'll get you moving.
But I do hate it when I'm in a hotel and I wake up and it's black in the room. I hate that. Yeah. So I don't yet really know what I'm going to do.
I'll get you a housewarming gift of the Hue lights.
The Hue lights, yeah. Or at least like a lamp or something. Yeah, I'm going to need to figure that out. But sleep is sacred. It's like sleep is sacred. It's a form of medicine, I think, for the brain, as is exercise, crucially important.
Yeah. I've just sort of drew a hard line in the sand myself. And I just don't screw around with it anymore. Like some of my friends, we had dinner last week for his birthday. A bunch of people, and everyone's going out afterwards. It was like 9:30 already. I was like, nah, I'm going to go home and go sleep. And I think for a while, people like, they give you this social pressure. It's like, oh, come on, whatever. And it's like, that's hard to get over. I did the same thing with, I'm not doing any what I call social drinking, talk about social jet lag of just like being out, having 1 or 2 glasses of wine, having a drink here or there. It's just like, it ruins my sleep and I get no benefit from it. And I think that the first few times that happened as well, it was tough socially to have everybody like, oh yeah, come on, you just have one drink or try this thing or whatever. And you'd be like, no, I'm okay. Like it was really awkward to be in social events where everybody else is drinking, you're not drinking. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of these things with with health habits. It's really challenging to establish them when you have this social pressure to conform to what everybody else is doing. But it's just like anything else that you haven't done before. It's sort of like a skill that you learn of just like, oh, you get through it a couple times and it's super easy. And so if something feels daunting or awkward and someone's trying to make some of these health changes that we've given in the podcast, they're not eating a certain food or they're doing, not using a plastic bottle for drinking water and their family's like, oh, what are you doing, weirdo, not using plastic? Yeah. It's going to feel terrible and it's going to feel awkward. And I want people to understand like I go through that and went through that as well. Like that phase is not you or any problem with you. It's the same thing. Like we want to feel like we belong with our social circle. Yeah. And any health change, like if you're making changes now in 2020, you're going to be the freak. And that's just the way it is. And so I would say just as a tip for people, just like don't feel bad about that. And like it's going to feel awkward as you're making these shifts if you haven't done so already, and just keep charging forward. Yeah, don't feel bad. I definitely want to optimize my sleep and be going to bed earlier. But unlike you, I don't have a fiance. I'm like on the hunt, to try to find that special somebody. And so predatory on the hunt. on the hunt. I don't know. It sounds kind of primal, actually. Yeah, it's tough. I mean, how do you do that now? I mean, do you? Well, not by going to bed at 9 o'clock every night. I'll tell you that. Especially here. Yeah, especially here. Yeah. So I don't get to go to bed that early, and I'm not out like on the prowl just to kind of further the awkwardness of the. Ladies is available. No, but I actually I spend a lot of time with my brothers watching. Like we're binge watching like Netflix into the wee hours, and so that's a big problem. But do you wear glasses like the tinting glasses or anything like that? Or? I do often, but I don't always.
but I am a big believer in their power, you know, in terms of reducing blue light induced melatonin suppression. So I do wear them sometimes. I haven't been wearing them a lot lately, but yeah.
Yeah, no one's perfect.
No one's perfect. I was wearing them for a while, and then me and my brothers, somehow my glasses ended up becoming my brother's glasses. Explain how that happens. I have no idea. I left them at his house. I was wearing them. I left them at his house, and then I just like left them there, and then they became his, and now he wears them, which is so funny. But no, I mean, I generally will watch up until I generally will give myself another hour after watching before I go to sleep
to wind down,
just to like destimulate. But yeah, I do end up going to bed late as a result, which is not ideal. But I also allow myself to wake up late, so I don't have to wake up to an alarm clock. I end up waking up, I think, later than most people. I can sleep until, I mean, you wake up at 4 or something. I sleep until 7.
Not typically when I'm here. Yeah. 6:30 when I'm at home.
Really? Yeah. For me, it's like 8.
Well, the Spaniards are sleeping till like noon, I think, and then taking a nap.
And they're doing pretty well.
Great. So whatever works for you, man.
Yeah.
So book, when's it coming out?
Yeah. So the book should be out now, or just about to come out. It's called The Genius Life. You can pick it up Barnes & Noble, Amazon.com. You can go to geniuslifebook.com to pick it up. But I'm super excited for it, man. It's like I worked really hard on it, and I think it's going to give people a lot of really powerful tools, you know, in a way that's not pedantic. You know, people will really be able to sink their teeth into some really good science. But at the end of the day, I think what my work really, I try to make things super actionable for people, and to kind of inspire the awe in others that I feel about these topics. And yeah, so I'm excited to get into people's hands. And then, of course, I have my own podcast, which is also called The Genius Life. Looking forward to having you on it whenever you want to come on. And I'm pretty active on Instagram at Max Lugavere.
Awesome. Thanks, Mac.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, dude.